Hello and welcome back to this awesome tutorial series. When we left off, we showed how the public variables looked and how our scene looks. So that said, let's get started into actually adding some player movement. And so you're new to code. And you might say that seems pretty difficult. How do we do that? And that's the cool thing about Unity. It's not that difficult. Actually, it's not difficult at all. After having these variables set up, we need one more variable, and that will be to control our rigid body, which would be the driving force in our mechanism to make our player move. So let's do private, because we're not going to call it from anything, and we want a rigid body, which is like a rag doll would be a rigid body. Just physics engine, it would be in your rigid body. Rigid body, and let's call it something cool, like rigid body with an underscore. And if you don't add the underscore, you have to be careful to not override mono behaviors. So if you create a function, for example, this is called start. This is always called to initialize for the initialization of the project in the beginning, so on, which is great. However, you might not want that. If you call a start function, you're always going to get that. So you'd want to do this, and then you'd have to reference it to that. But we want a start function. We want to assign variables in our start function. In fact, we want to assign these two variables. How do we do that? Now, we don't want it, since they're private, we can't drag and drop them. We do this. We write the variable. So let's start with player transform equals, and then we're going to get component of the current object the script is on. So how do we get a component? Well, I have a suggestion. We write get component, and there it is. Now we need a less than sign or greater than less than sign, and inside here we say, what are we grabbing? We're grabbing the transform, and outside we put parentheses just for the heck of it. And actually, there's logic behind it, but I don't want to confuse you. It just says we're grabbing the whole script. Now, this isn't the best way to do it, but you can also do shorthand, which would be, and you don't have to copy me because I'm going to erase this really quickly, but you can do player transform equals game object dot transform. It would do the same thing. However, we're going to do this method with the rigid body, and that's how you get components. And that's, I think, what I want to, that's what I want to teach you, and I think that would be the best way to just not confuse you with any other methods of getting components except this one. So rigid body equals get component rigid body, and we add the parentheses to say we're getting something, right? And that's all you need to know for that part. We're not passing any variables in here, so that's why they're empty. But again, too advanced. So after that's done, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to first actually save, so Control S. We're going to go into Unity, and we need to actually add a rigid body. Now, where do we add a rigid body? We add a game objects here, and we might want to add a component. So we open the component window, and we see all these cool things, like we can add effects, physics, really cool stuff. But what we really want to do is go to physics and add rigid body. After that being added, we see that we have huge gravity, kinematics, and so on, which we don't care about. We're going to turn using gravity off. We can also do this via code, and we're going to, just to show you how powerful code can be. So if we want to make this just a drag and drop ready code, we might want to do something like this. So we're calling our rigid body script, And we've already stored it, right? So rigid body dot using, and again, everything in the inspector is public. So we can go using gravity. Since I saw it in the inspector, I know it's public, and we can just pass false, like so. And if we go into Unity here, we see rotation, freeze rotation, and we can check all these. Or, better yet, we go to our code, and we go rigid body dot freeze rotation. And actually, you know, if you don't know that there's such a function, you can just hit dot, and you can just scroll down. And here, you have a little tooltip. Controls whether physics will change the rotation of the object. And no, it will not. So freeze rotation equals true. After that being set up, we're ready to code. Now we have update is called once per frame. And you might say, well, we can just put the code in here. And yes, we can. We can code our whole physics engine in the update. However, our update is doesn't use the correct frame rate. There's going to be latency, so on. It won't be true physics unless we do fixed update. So I'm going to put fixed right here. Fixed. And what this is the fixed frame rate call. So no matter what your latency and frame rate is, your fixed update is always going to be the same. So now here we will start coding, and we're going to start by turning around our object. Something really interesting, right? So how do we do that? Well, we have our transform, so we're going to do player transform dot rotate, because that's what we want to do, right? We want to rotate. And it's going to ask us to pass Euler angles. And you're like, what is a Euler? You know, what are Euler, sorry. And an Euler is this guy, and he created if and then statements. You don't really care. What you care about is the angles, and it's x, y, and z. Vector 3 is x, y, and z. And that's all that matters. So the rotation So we're not rotating on the x, because that would be up and down to us, relative to us. We're rotating on the y, so let's leave that empty, and we're not rotating on the z. And inside the y, how are we going to rotate it? And if we go back into Unity, remember when I started this tutorial series, I told you about this cool thing in our edit and our project settings. It's called our input manager. And here you don't have to edit anything. We're going to use the basics like I typically do. And we're going to open the horizontal. Now it's called horizontal, negative button left and right, and it has the inputs for the game. So if like let's say we want to use arrow keys, horizontal would understand that our left and right arrow key is horizontal, but also A and D is horizontal. And the latency and the sensitivity for the Xbox controller. So using this would assure us that we could use this on any platform. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to our code here now. And we're going to type in input, since it is player input, dot, and then you want to say get button, but since we're just getting from positive infinity to negative infinity, that's how I like to think about it, but it's actually axes. We're going from the horizontal axes. So no matter what button, no matter what object, we're just getting the axes. So get axes. And what is it called? Well, I told you it's called horizontal. And spelling is just of crazy importance. Without it, we might not get the right axes. So that's that. Now let's make it spin. And let's add a semicolon here. Hit save, Control S, go into Unity, and we hit play. Oops. horizontal is not set up. And I misspelled horizontal because I did not capitalize H. Let's capitalize H. Let's save this, go to Unity, hit play. And now, like so, we are gold. We are spinning the cube. And that is it for part 6 of this tutorial series. Join us in part 7 when we start adding movement so we can move the player around the plane or the cube ground